Hi everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at chapter 7 from the Road to Latin textbook. Specifically, we're going to look at the first story from chapter 7 called Laeca Poeta. So like I always tell you in these videos, if you want to see more or learn more about this chapter, including the story, feel free to take a look at Nova Latin, my website. If you look at the digitized version of Road to Latin, you can find a lot of the discussion, the grammar notes that Helen Chesnutt and her colleagues wrote. You'll see a version there where I've just digitized the textbook. If you look at my version of the textbook, I've added a few more of my own grammar notes, some videos, things to help you out with this particular story. You could find, for instance, the story with the cases highlighted, which is something I do in this video too. You can find an English translation, just a bunch of other things that might help you understand the story a little bit better. So feel free to take a look. But before you dive into translating again, I tell you in all my videos, please learn the vocab first. It's really tricky to try to translate any language, including Latin, when you don't know the words. And I see that all the time with my students where they don't know the words and they just struggle trying to figure it out. To avoid that problem, you need to memorize the vocab for this chapter. If you do use my textbook, you can find I have all the vocab there. I have English derivatives for you that might help you associate the words with English. And I have Quizlets to help you practice and just get a chance to learn the words. So take some time, memorize the words first. It's always a great first step. Then I'd recommend you dive into the grammar, and I'll give you a quick overview of the grammar in a second. But learning the grammar so that you can see it in context of the story and recognize it is a major component, right? It's tricky to translate if you're not sure entirely what you're looking at in terms of grammar. So start with vocab, look at the grammar. Then you want to make sure that you're reading the story out loud, right? I know you've heard me say this a lot, but when you read the story aloud, you can practice your pronunciation, your speaking skills, right? It just gives you a chance to really bring the language to life. And maybe even more importantly is having someone read the story back to you. So if you can find a classmate, whatever you need, someone who can read the story in Latin, that listening skill is really, really important and will help you process and internalize the language. And you'd be shocked at how much better you become at Latin by hearing it and just catching the patterns and hearing the sounds. Languages are meant to be spoken, of course. So you never want to shut off your speaking or listening component to the language, right? Those skills, you don't want to get rid of them. So always do that first. Like I said, before we dive in though, I just want to give you a quick grammar overview. And again, go back, if you're using the actual textbook, feel free to read the notes and the discussion points that Chesnutt and her colleagues put in there. If you're using my textbook, look at the grammar notes I've provided, the practice problems, whatever it is, but make sure you have a key understanding of the grammar. But the quick version is this. In this chapter, we're getting introduced to another case. So far we've seen the nominative case, which is for subjects, right? The accusative case, which is used for direct objects. We've seen the genitive case to show possession, and we've seen the dative case to show the indirect object, or sometimes it goes with special adjectives like dear, right? You can say this is dear to someone or near to something, right? But now we want to come back and learn about the ablative case. So you'll hear me say this in a second, but the ablative case is a little complicated. It's probably the most complicated case we have in Latin because it has so many different uses. In this particular instance, though, we're looking at prepositional phrases. So if you're not sure what a prepositional phrase is, it's just a phrase, right? Two words, basically. It consists of a preposition, which shows you relative position. Think of words like in, on, under, beside, out of, things like that. Those are all prepositions, right? And I say relative because if you think about it, if you were to ask someone where you're standing, depending on the point of view, they might say you're next to this, but to someone else, you might be next to something completely different, right? So I guess it kind of depends on your point of view. You might say that you're standing on top of a chair, but if someone is flying above you, they're looking down at you, maybe it looks like you're under a tree, whatever it is. So there's a relative nature to it. But there has to be a preposition and there has to be a noun. So for instance, you would have to sit under a tree, right? If you don't have a noun, you'd just be saying, oh, I'm sitting under. It's a little confusing. Like, what are you sitting under, right? We need the thing that you are in relation to, if that makes sense. The noun part is really important. Prepositions just are what they are. They're kind of standard words in Latin. You memorize them or look them up in a dictionary. They never change. You'll be fine. It's the noun that goes with it that gets tricky because Latin uses cases, right? And nouns have cases. So the question becomes, what case do you use? Well, in Latin, the noun in a prepositional phrase is either going to be accusative or ablative. So there's two options. The good news is there's not six options, right? The bad news is there's not one. So in other words, you don't just use one specific case, which I get would probably be easier for us learning language. You have to make a decision on which one is being used. And in Latin, when you're reading, like original Latin or even a textbook like Road to Latin, knowing what the case means is critical, because if you have a preposition going with accusative, it means something different than if it was going with the ablative, and I'll show you what I mean. But the basic breakdown is this: when you have a prepositional phrase using an accusative case noun, it's showing motion into or toward something, right? That's the general idea, into or toward. So if you wanted to say, oh, I'm running into the field, accusative, or I'm walking into the house or toward the house, accusative. The ablative case, the new one we're learning, is used to show position or location. So what I mean by that is if you're just saying where someone is. So if you're sitting under a tree, ablative. If I'm standing inside my house, ablative. If I'm on top of the roof, ablative. I'm just showing position. There's not necessarily any motion involved with that. The other element for ablative is motion out of or away from. So if you say you're going into the house, it would be accusative, the word house. But if I'm going out of the house, it needs to be ablative. So there's a big difference there. Okay? So my textbook gives you more of a description of this. The simple diagram I like to use, you can find it on my version of the textbook too, is the house diagram, right? So if you're thinking of a house on the left, those are your accusatives. So if I'm going into or toward, the middle is ablative, right? Your position or location. And the right-hand side is when you're showing motion out of or away from, ablative. Okay, that's the simplified version of it. The last quick note I'd give you on the grammar, and you're actually, I think, if I remember correctly, going to see an example of this in this story. The ablative case has a lot of uses, right? It doesn't only show up as a prepositional phrase, sort of like accusative, right? We've seen the accusative case is used as a direct object, but now I'm telling you it can also be used as a prepositional phrase. Those two different things. Same thing with ablative. It's not just for prepositional phrases. It can be used on its own, and it has a bunch of different meanings that we're going to spend a lot of time talking about in later chapters. So just be aware. I'll point it out in this video. I can think of at least one case where you bump into an ablative noun that's not part of a prepositional phrase, and we're going to just treat it like a vocab word. So that was a very long intro, right? But it is important that you really get the grammar down before you dive in. But if you're feeling confident in it, now you can skip ahead to the chapter story. So the story again, right, is called Laeca Poeta, which is how we start this story. Laeca is the name of a poeta, a poet. So you have Laeca Poeta, Willam pulchram in Italia habet. So Laeca the poet, right, or the poet Laeca, he habet, he has something. What does he have? He has a Willam pulchram. What is a Willam? A Willam is a house. Pulchram just means beautiful. So you're saying the poet Laeca, right, has a beautiful house in Italia. So when you see the noun Italia there, the first thing you'll probably notice is that it has a long A over the ending. That's the ablative case, which is why I put it in purple. For our highlighting purposes or our color coding purposes, purple is the color I always use for ablative, right? So it means in Italy, right? He has a beautiful house in Italy. Why did I use the ablative here? Because I'm just showing the position or location of the house. It's in Italy, inside Italy. Nobody's going into Italy, right? So it's not going to be accusative. I'm just simply saying where it is. This is what I mean by position or location when you're talking about the ablative case. So the poet Laeca, he has a beautiful villa, a beautiful house in Italy. Then you have in villa, Laeca cum filia Julia habitat. So in the house, again, ablative. Why did I say in the house? Because the ablative is just showing the location. He's not going into the house, he's already inside of it. So in the house, in villa, Laeca habitat, Laeca lives. So you're saying Laeca lives in the house. Cum filia Julia, with his daughter Julia. Now, this is a use of an ablative in a prepositional phrase with the word cum, right? With. This is one of the major uses of the ablative when you're with someone, right? Cum means with in Latin. So it's not showing position or location, really. I guess kind of if you're with someone, it implies a little bit of that. But the shorthand version of this is whenever you see cum, right, it's probably going to go with an ablative now. That's the general way to think of it, right? It would never go with an accusative. You're going to go ablative here. So you're saying Laeca lives in the house with his daughter Julia, filia Julia, right? That's who he's with. Then you have aqua est proxima villae. So there is aqua est. You can either say water is, or you could say there is water. Proxima, near or close by, nearby. Remember, proxima is one of those words that takes a dative. You're nearby to something. So it's saying there's water near to or nearby the villa, or the villae rather, dative, the house, right? So there's water near the house. And if you look at the picture to the right, you can kind of see this little river thing going by his villa, right? Then you have in aqua, poeta naviculum rubram habet. So in aqua, in the water, again, it's ablative because it's saying inside the water or on the water, you might say, right? It's that position or location part of our house diagram, if that helps you think of it. So in the water, the poet has a naviculum rubram, a small red boat or a little red boat, right? So a naviculum, right, if you look at the vocab, just means like a boat. It really means a little boat, right? It's not as big as like a seafaring boat. It's more like a skiff, I think is the terminology that they used in the vocab, but a little boat, right? A little red boat. Sure, he painted it red. Why not? Then you have poeta ex villa saepe propera. Okay, so the poet, he often properat, he often hastens or hurries. It's one of our vocab words for this chapter. He often hurries ex villa, out of the house. Now, your book uses the term ex villa. You also could have put a villa here. So the letter E with a long mark, it would mean the exact same thing. Usually when you have a V following it, you'd say a villa, not ex villa, but it doesn't particularly matter. It still means out of the house. Why is villa ablative? Because it's showing motion out of something. He's going out of the house. He's hastening or hustling out of the house. So it's got to be an ablative noun. That's the idea. Then you have nunc in navicula est. So now, nunc, right, means now. He is, right? There's no nominative here, so it's still referring to poeta in the line before, the poet. So now he, meaning the poet, is in the little boat, in navicula. Notice how there's a long mark over the A in navicula. That makes it ablative singular, right? And it's ablative because he's on the boat. It's showing his position, right? There's no movement involved. He's just on the boat. So now he's on the boat, right? Ablative. Now we continue on to the next part of the story. You have tum ab ora poeta navigat. So then the poet, the poeta, there's your subject, right? So you're saying then the poet, in this case, you probably say sails away, right? Navigat, sails is the idea. He's sailing. Ab ora is going to mean away from the shore. The ora is the shore. Right? Why is it ablative? Because it's showing motion away from something, ab ora. So since he's going away, and you can see in the picture, there's a guy, a little man in the boat in the picture. That's the poet, I'm assuming. When you're going away from the shore, has to be ablative. That's why you have the long mark over the A and ora, right? For the word for shore. Then you have silvae quoque sunt proximae villae. So here, silvae is your subject, the woods. So woods, or the forest is kind of the idea, but the woods also are near, sunt proximae, right? Proximae is referring to silvae, that's why they're both nominative plural. So the woods are also near or close by, you might say. And again, whenever you say proxima, right, nearby, you're going to use the dative case for that adjective, right? So it's saying there are also woods near to, you might say, the villa, the house. Okay, so there's also woods near the house. So if you look over to our picture on the right, you can see in that sort of top left corner, there's some woods out there. That's probably what it's referring to. There's water and woods. Then you have in silvis Laeca saepe ambulat. So Laeca, the poet, often walks, ambulat, in silvis, right? So silvis here is ablative. Why is it ablative? Because he often walks in the woods. It's showing the position or location, right? So it's going to be ablative. The is ending is ablative plural. And one of the things you want to notice here, I think this is the first instance of it, you're noticing that when you pluralize the ablative in first declension, it's a long is, which is the exact same ending as dative plural. It feels a little confusing, but one way you can tell is the context. Dative does not go with prepositional phrases. So this in silvis is not dative, it has to be ablative. So even though the endings are overlapping there, they're the same thing, right? It's not too difficult to tell them apart as you go. All right. So Laeca often walks in the woods, right? And it tells you why. It says, poetae silvas et aqua maxime amat, quod in silvis et in aqua multas et pulchras picturas poetae viden. Okay. So long sentence, but there's a conjunction in the middle. It's basically two sentences put together. So you have poetae, poets. They maxime amat, they greatly or very much love or like. What do they love? Silvas, the woods, at aquam, and water. So it's saying poets really like or really love the woods and the water. Why? Quote, because, right? They love it because in silvis, et in aqua. Here's two prepositional phrases, both ablative, because they're showing just position or location. So in the woods and in the water, poetae vident, the poets see, or poets see, you might say. So in the woods and in the water, poets see multas pulchras picturas, many beautiful pictures. It doesn't mean like paintings, it means like scenes. They can see things, they can imagine things, is the idea. And then they go and write their poems about it, right? So it's talking about the inspiration of a poet. It's saying that they really love the water and the woods because this is where they can draw inspiration from, which is true. There's a ton of Latin poetry that involves the woods, right? And water too, I guess. So that's what it's getting at here. Okay. Then you have poetae a silvis et ab aqua properant et fabulas narrant. So poets, poetae, right? They properant, they hasten or they hustle a silvis et ab aqua, right? So it's talking about where they go. They hasten out of or away from the woods, right? And ab aqua, and away from the water, right? Meaning so it's talking about how they go to the woods and the water to get inspiration. Then they hustle or they hasten away from the woods and away from the water, or out of the woods, you might say. And they narrant fabulas, and they tell stories. So it's talking about how they go to the woods and the water, they go into nature to get inspiration, then they come running out and they have poems or stories to tell in this case, right? Fabulas. So then they tell you their stories, okay? Now we go to the final paragraph. You have Julia in villa laborat. So Julia is your subject, Julia. In villa laborat, she works or is working in villa, in the house. It's ablative because you're showing the just position or location. Where is she? She's inside the house. Feminae et puella romana in villis saepe laborant. So women, right, feminae, and Roman girls, puellae romanae, they often laborant, they work. They often work in villis, in houses. It's ablative plural because you're showing position. They are inside the houses, right? So it's saying Julia is working in the house because women and Roman girls often work in houses, right? Here we have noctu. So this is one of those things that you want to kind of treat as a standalone vocab word, which is how it's presented in the story, right? Noctu just means at night. It's technically ablative here, and you'll learn later on that one of the uses of the ablative is to tell time, right, or to show time. So for now, ignore it. I highlighted it purple here just so you could see it, but maybe it would have been better to leave it as just black unhighlighted, so that you don't get confused. But either way, it's a little preview of what's to come. But it's saying at night, noctu, Julia ex villa propera, right? So Julia, she properat, she hustles or hastens ex villa. And again, ex villa could have been a villa, e with a long mark, would have meant the same thing. But it's saying Julia hastens out of the house, right? So at night, Julia likes to go out of the house. Why is villa ablative, right? Ex villa, long A. It's ablative because it's showing motion out of or away from in this case. Then you have tum Julia cum Laeca in silvis ambulat. So then Julia, right? Julia ambulat, she walks, cum Laeca, with the poet. Remember, we said with goes with an ablative. So with Laeca, in silvis, in the woods. So talking about how at night they'd go off into the woods and walk together. Interdum poeta et filia ex silvis properant et in ora stant. Right? So it's saying meanwhile, right? Interdum, meanwhile, the poet, right? So poeta and the daughter, the filia, right? In this case, probably Julia, I'm assuming is his daughter. It's saying that the poet and the daughter, they properant ex silvis, they hustle or hasten. And notice how properant has the NT ending because you're talking about the two different people, right? They hasten ex silvis, out of the woods. Again, it's ablative because you're showing motion out of something. So they hasten out of the woods and they stand in ora, on the shore. So in is one of those funny words in Latin. It can mean in, like inside something. It can also mean on. You can't stand in a shore. That just doesn't make any sense. So you'd better off translating as on, right? So they stand on the shore. Okay? So it's talking about how they run out of the woods and they stand on the shore of the water, right? This is what they like to do. Then you have Laeca et Julia stellas et lunam spectant. So Laeca and Julia, there's your two nominative subjects, right? Laeca and Julia, they spectant, they watch. What do they watch? Stellas, the stars, and lunam, right? And the moon. So they like to go out, they stand on the shore, they look up at the stars and the moon. right? Nice picture. Then you have tandem, Laeca et Julia ab ora ambulant et in villa iterum sunt. So here you're saying tandem at last, or finally, you might say. Laeca and Julia, they walk ambulant, ab ora, away from the shore. Again, it's ablative because you're showing motion away from something. They walk away from the shore, and they are again, right? So sunt means they are. Iterum here means again. So you'd say again, they are in villa, in the house. Inside the house, it's ablative because you're showing position or location. Okay? So this first part of the chapter is really focused on the ablative case, right, and how it's used in prepositional phrases. Again, it's more often than not used to show location of something or motion out of or away from. We're going to see in later stories that the accusative is really for motion into or towards something, and we'll build that up as we go. But this story really gives you a good amount of repetition. Almost every single sentence has a prepositional phrase in it, just to let you repeat these phrases over and over again and see how the ablative works in action. So again, hopefully this wasn't too bad for you to translate. Make sure that you're reading through the grammar notes. This chapter can be a little tricky, right? It takes a little bit of getting used to. Read the grammar. If you have any questions at all about the story or how I translated it, or you want clarification on anything, just let me know in the comments down below and I'll be happy to help. But otherwise, just keep working at it. And like I always tell you, the more you practice and the more you read, the better off you're going to be. Good luck.